Hello and welcome back to another episode. Look, if you're a fan of ultra running or you're just a bystander that has sort of dipped into the sport through social media, I don't think you'll need many guesses on what I'm going to open the podcast with today as far as topics. And, it's the Western States 100. I don't know about you, but I think it was evidence how much my fandom for the sport has continued to grow because I had the live stream open for the majority of the day, working in and out of things around the house yesterday. What a race. Anyway, we'll get to it. I also want to allude to the fact that we'll dive into some research again. Got some really positive responses and just some cool engagement with people online talking about, training volumes and, what's more effective using distance or time as measurements and stuff like that. So it was really, really cool to have some nice positive back and forth. And I think the biggest experience that I'm noticing so far with a lot of my engagement starting to increase now as a result of the podcast and everything that I'm putting out on Instagram and YouTube and the like is I'm not having a traditional, maybe I'm just not having enough interaction yet, but the negative responses aren't really coming out. It's just growth mindset. And I think that's very reflective of ultra runners. We're a tight-knit community and most importantly, we're a supportive community. And I think it's a beautiful thing to not agree on every single practice, to have some nuanced conversation and just continue to harbor an environment that is encouraging for people to want to join. And that's largely what I'm going to continue to do. You'll hear me repeat this again and again and again, that I just want the sport to grow and I want to be a part of that growth. And as I've alluded to, I want to have more conversations with not just elite runners, but mid-packers, backpackers. Stories are evident throughout every single ultra. We all do it for different reasons. We're doing different races for different reasons. We're traveling for different reasons. And I think those stories deserve to be told. And on that front, I was actually very fortunate to jump on a call with Ed Payne this morning. So you may remember me talking about the Spine Race UK a couple of weeks ago, which was the 268 mile race through the UK that Ed won. We had a little bit of back and forth in the DMs and, long or the short, he wasn't really comfortable jumping on the podcast, which is totally fine. And I respected him for saying no, not just feeling obliged to because he'd got this race result. And I definitely didn't want to come across that way that, it was the sole reason why I wanted to speak to him, although you're always intrigued by someone who has performed at that level. But he agreed to sort of talk away from a podcast setting, something that we wouldn't be sharing. And, I won't divulge anything that we really went into, but it was just a really nice conversation. One thing that I will say is that we didn't speak about anything to do with pacing, training strategy, nutrition, or anything like that. Again, it just comes back to story, experiences, how and why we do these things, what we're projecting we're going to be doing in the future, what we learn from things, getting some of the insights about how he's matured as a runner and stuff like that. So I was very grateful for his time. So if you do see this, Ed, thanks again, mate. It was awesome to chat to you over there in Ireland. And I hope that we do cross paths again and you do get to share more of your experiences there because you're very much worthy of that result. So yeah, let's get into things now. And on a research front, we'll discuss some papers on total energy expenditure during an ultra marathon, so a 100 miler. It's not so much going to shift how we approach or some practices to take into it, but it's a really cool observational study about what happens to the body during an ultra and more so what happens on the back side of it as well and how hard it is to fuel these things. But it also demonstrates, even just from a long run perspective, why fueling your runs and then getting on top of your nutrition away from training is so important for overall health and longevity in the sport as well. And then we'll also touch on some hot water immersion and the way that can serve you in heat acclimation for hotter races. What is the science sort of leading us towards with any sort of performance benefits? Is it worth including in your training? Access is a big problem for a lot of people getting into either a hot tub or a sauna and stressing about, which one's better or should I even be focusing on it. So we'll touch on those sort of topics as well. But let's start with the Western states. If you didn't catch it, I'm sure you're probably seeing little clips and everything starting to flood your socials. Well, at least it is for me. The algorithm's got me sorted out. 2 course records in the male and female categories. Vincent Bouillard, the winner of the men's category, taking down Jim Walmsley 2019 course record, which I believe was about 14 hours 10 at that point in time, and he ran a time of 13 hours 46. So the first winner to go sub 14, and the whole podium went sub 14 hours. Fucking nuts. Just insane. And as far as an actual race is concerned, the competitive side, the sports entertainment side, it's probably the most entertaining that we've had. So to speak to the surprising side of things was the amount of DNFs from the big names in the male field particularly. So you had the likes of Hans Troyer, who led a lot of the race. He dropped out, I believe, at about the 78-mile mark after just absolutely flying. And, obviously he was well under course record at that point in time. We haven't heard from a lot of these DNFs yet, which is completely understandable. You got to recover, and it's an emotional toll to put yourself out there. It's one thing to just have a back and forth with a camera and let social media judge you as a nobody. But to be an elite performer, money on the line, sponsors, all that sort of stuff, I can't imagine the pressure that you're under to perform and how difficult it must be to maintain the love of the game and your enjoyment and to hold that front and center in a performance setting. It's something that I don't envy, to be completely honest. So yeah, unfortunately Hans led from the front for a lot of the race. But it didn't pan out as he would have liked. But then also, the greats, Jim Walmsley, DNF, Kilian Jornet, DNF, both suffering knee injuries. Well, at least that's what we assume with Jim. He was sort of getting some treatment there from his crew at one point in time, got out again and just couldn't get going again. Hayden Hawkes, who's podiumed, Dan Jones, the Kiwi, one of my favorites, love Dan. Just didn't have a day. He's finished in the top 5 the last 3 years, I believe. DNF'd as well. And on the women's front, last year's winner, Abby Hall, DNF. So this race was brutal. And I think it just goes to show, I was talking to Ed about this morning actually, how I think, and maybe it's just the course itself, being negatively graded and being such a fast course itself, it almost feels like we've shifted a lot of marathon physiology knowledge and race strategy and click and dragged that out to the 100-mile. I feel like it's just on a razor's edge, the level that these guys are pushing to and are able to push towards now. It's insane to watch. I mean, just to fathom covering 100 miles under 14 hours. I mean, for most, just finishing is enough. And then you sort of look to around that 24-hour mark, again, depending on what sort of terrain you're looking at for these races completely dictates this as well. But, that's sort of the first time marker that people are looking at. I know that's one that I was looking at the Cape, was trying to get under 24 hours. So to knock 10 hours more, like what? And it's a Californian summer. Yes, they had favorable conditions. It was a little bit cooler than it usually is. I don't think we saw temperatures on course over 30 degrees Celsius. But regardless, and maybe that will play in favor of keeping these course records for both men and women. So Jen Lichter broke Courtney Dauwalter's course record by 1 minute. That's how tight it was. And it just goes to show how good of a performance that was for Courtney that year. Obviously conditions were a lot hotter, but then you look at Jen Lichter on 100-mile debut, Francesco Pupi 100-mile debut in the men's, gets second place, overtook Hans, and was leading for the majority of that. It wasn't until the 90-mile mark. 90 miles he lost the lead. That's how close it came. So these races were good, whereas Jen had it her way for the majority. Like after halfway, it was how much of a gap could she put on the rest of the field, Riley Brady and stuff like that. So insane, absolutely insane. Vincent now, what a whirlwind couple of years he's had, burst onto the scene as an unsponsored runner, no sponsors behind him, wins UTMB in 2024, and now goes and wins Western States with a course record. Like, what a trajectory. Like, this sport is just being redefined year on, year out. I feel very privileged to be a fan at this time and be involved, someone who's trying to master their craft in this ultra world and figure out what sort of distances suit me best and how to solve certain things. And it's just such a cool time to be watching all these different athletes perform at the top end. Like even Rachel Entrekin in the Cocodona 250 and seeing the performances that she put out. And finally getting her flowers after, winning it multiple times. It just goes to show that the sport itself is starting to open up to the possibilities of, championing these people that are doing these things. And another thing that I spoke about with Ed this morning, and I spoke about on the podcast, and I'll probably just continue to echo because I need the message out there, is like, we need to tell these stories. Stories. I want to continue to see all of these athletes given the opportunity to show how they go about things, and not force it upon them either, because some people don't want to talk about that shit. They're just happy going out there and continue to serving themselves. And that's a lot of what Ed echoed in our conversation this morning, is that it has to be for you first. And I think that is very important. And perhaps once it does get to that elite status, that becomes very difficult, like I was talking about earlier. But yeah, I'm just blown away with where the sport is. The coverage was great. How they managed to get cameras out there on the trail cams with the drones and all that sort of stuff. And they copped a little bit of flack comparative to the night crew that took over after a lot of the big names came through. But I thought Corinne Malcolm and Dylan Bowman did an exceptional job to be on the mic for like 15 hours straight, basically. I can't imagine the concentration, just your voice, having to come up with insightful stuff, trying to figure out who that individual runner was by some, at times, grainy drone footage out in the backcountry of California. I wasn't sitting there thinking like, just shut up. I'd rather just not listen to anything. I don't know about you if you were watching it, but I thought they did an outstanding job of making what is not a spectator-friendly sport quite spectator-friendly. And again, maybe I'm somewhat brainwashed because I just love this shit no matter what. But yeah, I thought it was really engaging. It wasn't, whereas, a backyard ultra, ultimately you're sort of just checking in every hour, see who got back out on that loop. There's not much info going on, there's not people out on course that are feeding info back to anyone that's, running a live stream or anything like that. Whereas during the Western States, they're constantly getting text messages from people at different aid stations. You're getting information on how the runner's looking. Are they looking strong? Are they battled? Like what, maybe they were overhearing some conversations with their crew, and if there's some gut issues or an injury that they're trying to manage or something like that. And that was enough to just really keep you engaged. And then not to mention just the competitive nature of the race itself. I think that actually led to the enjoyment factor, the fact that it was so competitive, and we saw a race lead change so late. I don't think we've ever seen one that late before. So yeah, if you haven't checked out much, go and search anything and everything that you can get your hands on. Start at the Western States page and, go follow some athletes, and I'm sure we'll start to hear some some breakdowns, some reviews from those elites that didn't have the day that they wanted. Yeah, what an amazing time. But now I want to jump into a lot of the research. So as I was saying, this first paper that we're going to look at dives into the total daily energy expenditure of runners during a 100-mile event. So this race took place in Utah. It was a point-to-point race. There was like 7,800 meters vert. But first, I better give you the title of the paper. So total energy expenditure and intake during a 161-kilometer mountain ultramarathon. And this was published in the International Journal of Sports, Physiology and Performance by Krier and colleagues last year. So it got published in April of last year. So only 2 runners were tracked for this. So again, this is where I say, as far as changing what you do during a race or informing any sort of strategy, probably not going to be the paper that shifts the ultra running world. But I thought it was just a really cool paper that demonstrated what happens to the body during a race. So they gave these guys doubly labeled water. So essentially what that does in layman's terms is it puts in 2 stable isotopes, so an oxygen and hydrogen, and it measures carbon dioxide release from the body. So that is an expression of energy expenditure. So essentially you're measuring the exhaust from a car, and you can work backwards mathematically to figure out how much fuel you put in that car to burn that amount of exhaust. So that's what they do. So they take that before the race, and then they, through different measurements through their urine, they're able to identify how long it's taking for the body to excrete those waste products. So they get into the race, they get it done in, ironically, exactly the same time. So this was not planned. These runners didn't know each other, but they finished in just under 33 hours. And that's another thing that I think is really cool, is these are non-elites. So we're able to derive a lot more of probably what's stereotypical behavior for people that are finishing mid to back of pack. So again, a brutal course looking at it. Like 7,800 meters vert is no joke for a race, and some pretty big temperature swings as well. So I think the highest recorded temperature that I had out there was 28 degrees Celsius, and then overnight, and then 5 degrees overnight. So over 20 degree swings, which again, that's really brutal. The interesting thing that came to light from these 2 runners as well is the difference in body weight. So one runner was 74 kilos and the other was 59 kilos, yet their total energy expenditure that was accounted for as an average for the 24-hour period was basically the same. So it ended up being about 15,000 calories, just under 16,000 calories, which when you look at that for food, that is an insane amount of food. Don't think many people are going to be replacing that one for one, right? So this goes to show, as far as fuel utilization is concerned, just being able to be diverse in, your carb intake and being apt at using carbs as a fuel source. You also are going to have to be highly fat adapted. And I think that's where a lot of the nuance in the conversation gets lost at the moment is, is this high carb thing bullshit? We're getting people to take on too many carbs. You need to be focusing on more ketogenic based diets because that's going to mobilize fat oxidation way better. But the reality is that even high carb athletes are going to be especially elites are going to be really good at utilizing fat as a fuel source as well. So you need to be flexible, and your training and your nutrition will help dictate how flexible you can be in that state. So these guys, they only ended up taking on about 50% of the fuel required for the expenditure that they put out during the race. Total fluid intake, so runner 1 took on 21.8 liters and runner 2 took on 15.7 7 litres. Sodium consumption, so runner 1 averaged 421 milligrams of salt, runner 2, 527. Runner 1 took on 21.8 litres of fluid. Runner 2 took on 15.7 litres of fluid. They didn't specify whether there was sodium in the fluid that they were consuming, but sodium that was reported to be taken during the race was an average of 420 meg an hour for runner 1 and 527 meg for runner 2. Where it gets really interesting, and where I want to, if you have run 100 miles plus before, or even just any ultra, to be honest, is the expenditure in the 24 hours post race. So for runner 1 in the 24 hours post race, the energy expenditure was basically 5,100 calories. And for runner 2, it was 4,100. So that is still extremely high energy expenditure, even when all external stimulus from a race perspective has been removed. And then for the 7 days post-race, it was still elevated at 3,200 and 2,700 respectively. So this just goes to show how much of a stress the body is under during a 100-mile ultra. And they also provided the deficit that they would be in. It basically ended up being 1,100 and 900 calories per day that they needed to make up for the lack of fuel taken on during the race. Eating is so important in this sport. It is so important. And even when the job is done, your job is not done. Because ultimately, we want to get back to doing the thing that we love as soon as we can, and that's running. And the recovery process is nurtured by eating. It's going to take time to regulate things like sleep again. I haven't run an ultra, even a 50K, where that night's sleep has been great. So it takes time to re-regulate. Don't think that the lack of expenditure after the race means that you then have to start watching what you're eating. That week after, as it's just demonstrated in that paper there, is critical that you're focusing on taking in more nutrition. It's not an easy task, I get it, and eating creates a lot of issues for people from a behavioral perspective. That's the tricky part about eating, right? Is it's not like when it comes to like addiction or disorders, it's not like drugs and alcohol where you can absolve yourself from them and live a healthy and regular life. You don't get to choose whether or not you eat and drink water. So they are a part of being alive. So the relationships with them do become difficult, but I encourage you to look at your food as fuel. If you are preparing for ultras, trying to run them regularly, you need to be looking after your body, and eating is going to be the best way to help regulate sleep, which is the next best recovery tool alongside eating. So again, I don't think that paper really gave us too much in the space of what it means to perform great. But I also love the fact that we have a little bit of research, although it's only 2 individuals, about what goes on in the body, and the fact that despite differences in weight, you can, experience different levels of intensity and effort during the same thing and finish at the exact same time. But the biggest takeaway from this, right, is food is important. So if you're taking on your long runs and you're not fueling them adequately, and even if you are not going to be eating calorie for calorie replacement or what you are burning. It's not going to happen. You're still going to be in some sort of deficit. So it is important that you're accounting for that. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be counting calories. I don't count calories, not to the nth degree anyway. I have a rough idea by, creating the same meals. Like I do a lot of meal prep And then I know roughly, there's this many grams when I weigh out this much rice and this is the meat, and I keep the portion size regular so that when I pull something out of the freezer, I roughly know, okay, sweet, I got to have that, which means I can have that. And then if I've got my long run, it's easier for me to figure out what I need to stack on top of that to account for those calories across the week. And you start to get a bit of a feel for it, and if you start to feel a bit run down and then you sort of see how much training you've done that week, you're like, oh shit, maybe I haven't done the best job that I could have from an eating point of view. So yeah, that's what I love about that paper. It's probably not driving any performance changes, but it just goes to show what is going into an ultra marathon, in that there is not one person at that start line that is going to get away for free at the end of it, and even if you don't, you're still going to be up against it, right? And the next topic that I want to discuss is hot water immersion. So this field of research was largely explored by a researcher called Zurulu. I apologize if the pronunciation of that surname is incorrect, but about 10 years ago, 2016 was this first paper, which was titled Post-Exercise Hot Water Immersion Induces Heat Acclimation and Improves Endurance Exercise Performance in the Heat. So that was published in the Scandinavian Journal of Medical Science in Sports back in 2016. So him and his colleagues, they've done multiple papers over the last decade exploring hot water immersion. So again, hot water immersion is hot tubs, and doing that directly after a submaximal training workout, and then measuring that against endurance performance. Unfortunately, the endurance event that they're measuring is only a 5K time trial. So there's no real body of research out there that is looking at ultra endurance and the potential performance benefits. So they did increase the 5K TT by 5%, which is very, very impressive. So if you were able to extrapolate a 5% performance increase in an ultra marathon, whether you would ever see that, because it is so, again, multifactorial on what does shift the needle there, that would be an amazing result, right? However, we do know that hot water immersion, so again, to look at this field of heat acclimation itself, pretty much the gold standard goes hot tub, traditional sauna, infrared sauna. The big reason that you're able to tolerate more heat when it comes to a hot tub is the fact that when you are inside a sauna, and I'm sure a lot of you, if you've experimented with both, or even if you've only done sauna, you would know that your comfortability gets compromised very, very quickly. And that's because the surface of your skin on your face and surrounds near your brain are going to heat up, so that skin surface temperature increases. That makes things very uncomfortable, not to mention you're breathing in the humid air with inside the sauna itself. So that impacts things as well. Whereas obviously your head is above water, so that skin around your head isn't being heated up, and you're also then just breathing in ambient air. So that makes the comfortability of things easier. But also they found that the increases in core temperature and sweat rate actually are higher inside a hot tub, so long as it's between, I believe it's 40 and 43 degrees Celsius. So that's the caveat there. So anything less, and it's probably not as effective. And then also you can sit in there longer, right? So these guys in this particular study that I was just alluding to were in the hot tub. So they would do a submaximal, so 65% of VO2 on the treadmill, followed by 40 minutes in the hot tub. So 80 minutes total. And yeah, they were able to elicit greater performance benefits than those that were not heat exposed at all. But then there were similar benefits to those that just performed the treadmill workout in similar conditions. So I believe it was 33 degrees that they ran on the treadmill in. And then anyone that was at lower, so just general temperature, which I believe was 18 degrees, didn't receive the acclimation benefits. So we know that exposing yourself to heat increases blood plasma volume, which then can increase stroke volume, so the amount of blood that your heart ejects with each beat, and then it reduces your exercising heart rate. So essentially, you can be performing at a lower heart rate, ejecting the same amount of blood, circulating the same amount of blood in your system at the fraction of the cost. So that's how basically you become more efficient from heat. Then you also lower your core temperature when exposed to that same temperature at the same time, and you increase the time to sweat as well as your sweat rate. So you'll bring on sweat, which we know is your body's natural cooling system. So that cooling system kicks in a lot earlier when you have become exposed to heat. There is a lot of benefits to acclimatizing to the heat, and I think there is benefits there that should be noted if you are racing in the heat, which is obviously evident here in Australia. But then like a race, like Western states, typically those athletes are going to be taking up these modalities of passive heat exposure to become heat adapted. So I think it helps with the acclimation side of things. Whether there are direct performance benefits that are worth investing your time in doing this as a part of your training regime, that is where I think there is still a lot of science that needs to catch up, and we need to have more research in that space, and whether it really matters for ultra endurance. More so because time spent away from running, particularly in trails, where there are so many other factors that go into race performance, like the terrain that you're running on. So being able to specifically train on types of terrain that you're going to be racing in is obviously critical. Practicing fueling strategies, getting under a certain amount of fatigue during longer runs so that you're then able to see how your GI system performs. Increasing your sweat rate is going to affect, gut permeability, because you're then taking on more fluid. So what does taking on more fluid look like from a fueling perspective for you as an individual? So I think simply because, like we showed in that last paper, the amount of individual variability that we see in ultra running performances outside of acclimating for a hot race itself, if you're then trying to tack on much more, I don't think the average runner, be it me, is going to really receive any added benefits from doing that on top of everything at the cost of not running more. So total running volume is always going to help more than just sitting passively in a tub. Where I think it can help is if you're battling with an injury, if you're heading into a deload into the race, it could be a good strategy. It's something that I tried during the Cape to Cape, but again, there were other factors that sort of contributed to my demise. So whether it did or didn't work is up for debate. Again, I think it's so easy to start looking at these like little 1%ers as the hill to die on, so to speak. So I guess my overall summation on whether most people should use it, if you do have a hot race and you live in a cooler climate, definitely expose yourself because you can then also, I won't go on that tangent yet, getting into that adapted environment is going to be paramount. So if you don't live in that hot climate and you need to acclimate, great. If you're here in Australia where it is very humid, especially on the East Coast, there are then going to be there's going to be a rationale to use it on really, really humid periods. So I guess the way I would think about it, if you live in a humid climate, is you still want to expose yourself so that you can practice all of those other strategies that I just alluded to before that become a part of ultra training, because I think that's good psychological prep as well. If you go avoiding the hardest parts environmentally of what your race is going to dish up, I don't think artificially producing them, even from a physiological perspective, is going to do anything for your headspace. But where I do think there's benefits is on those days where you're bringing intensity deliberately into your session. So if you've got some like interval work or something like that you need to be getting in during the week, and it's going to be an absolute scorcher and it's really, really humid as well, you may be served just focusing on the intervals themselves But then, so doing that at the start of the day versus like the middle of the day so that you can maximize the performance of the side of things. But if you would usually top up with some volume either side of that, it may be more beneficial to just spend some time in the hot tub rather than trying to run later in the day or doing a double where it's still going to be quite hot and humid. So I think that's some areas that you can make that up. But again, what percentage of like the ultra running community outside of just getting more training volume in preparation for an ultra are going to benefit from passive heat exposure? It's probably going to be a very, very small amount. I know for me personally, with everything that I have to juggle with work and relationships and being a dad, a husband, a friend, all those sorts of things, it becomes increasingly hard to fit training in, full stop. And there's something about just sitting in a hot tub. Like if you're fortunate enough to have one at home, I'm fortunate that I do have one at my place of work. So, you know, even I am a step closer to being able to make that a lot easier. But again, it's most beneficial when done immediately after. When you're separating those things, then those two stresses compound because you've already started to go into recovery mode and then you're going up again. So the recovery toll on those things can become an issue as well. So again, all things to consider. At the end of the day, you're an individual, you're in control of what you think is and isn't worth it based on your values and why you run. But that's sort of the 2 cents from the literature in what it's providing. In that, yes, it definitely does provide acclimation benefits. It does seemingly provide performance benefits based on some of those adaptations, at least in smaller endurance events. But again, what does 5K look like at 50K, 100K, 100-mile, multi-day? Yeah, I don't know. I hope that the science continues to follow it. I think increasing blood plasma volume is probably a net positive for most people. We know that the increase in volume is a positive adaptation that you want for running, but whether or not it is going to be a true needle shifter when it comes to your race day experience, I think there's still more research that needs to happen. So look, that's all I've got for today. I hope those little dives into either side provided some insight, at least got you thinking about how you can or maybe can't go improving your race strategy. But you know, I'm going to continue to champion these guys at the top. I want to continue to hear from people mid-pack, backpack. So if you do have a race coming up, you know, tell me about it. Shoot me a DM. I want to hear from you. You know, if you've had a recent success or failure, you know, what have you been learning about your own training experience, and what are you using those experiences for to help guide you ahead? I want to hear these stories. I think there's so many to be told, and if I could be a vessel to help share some of these stories, I definitely want to be a part of that. So as always, have an amazing training week, whatever it is that you are working towards, and I will see you at the next one.